The sealed case had been in her arms for 11 days before she understood what was inside it. It was iron-bound, the latch shaped like two clasped hands pressed flat against the lid, the leather worn to a softness that suggested it had passed through many before her. Lord Erwick had placed it in her hands the morning she left Thornwall, had not looked at her when he did it, had addressed his instructions to the middle distance above her left shoulder, the way he always had, the way a man speaks to furniture he is rearranging. She was to carry it to the Alpha King's court at Greyveain. She was to deliver it to the King's Chamberlain and sign the receipt and return to the escort. She was not to open it. She was not to speak of its contents. She was to be, as she had always been in Lord Erwick's house, useful and invisible and quiet. Thyren Cassivale had been his ward for 19 years. She was good at all three. The road to Greyveain took 11 days through late autumn country, the land stripped and pale under a sky the colour of old iron. She rode in the middle of the escort, 8 of Erwick's men, none of whom spoke to her beyond what the journey required. She wore her travelling cloak, ash grey and practical, the hood worn back because she had learned long ago that hoods made her feel as though she was disappearing, and she had too great a talent for that already. Her braid had come partly undone by the 4th day. She did not redo it. There was no one to redo it for. She held the case across her knees on horseback, one hand resting on the lid, and she did not think about why Erwick had given it to her personally rather than to his captain. She did not think about why he had not met her eyes. On the 3rd night, camped at the way station above Meldrum Ford, she dreamed about warmth she could not locate. She woke with her hand pressed flat against the case, and the feeling still moving up her arm, and she lay still in the dark for a long time, listening to the horses and the low voices of the men on watch, and she told herself it was the cold. On the 5th day, one of the escort's horses threw a shoe outside a village too small for a smithy, and they stopped for 2 hours while the captain sourced a replacement. She sat on a low stone wall with the case in her lap and watched the village go about its mourning, and a woman crossing the market square with a basket of dried herbs on her hip stopped and looked at her, not at her face, at the case, and then walked faster, as though she had seen something she recognized and wished she hadn't. Thyren looked down at the case. The clasped hands on the latch were not decorative. They were a legal seal. She knew legal seals. Erwick had used her to transcribe contracts for years, had discovered early that she had a precise hand and a reliable memory, and had exploited both extensively without ever acknowledging either. She knew what clasped hands over a document meant under the old compact law. She had transcribed a dozen such contracts. She had never seen one with a name pressed into the base of the seal before. She had to tilt the case and find better light to read it. The morning was grey and flat, the village quiet around her, the men still occupied with the horse. She tilted and found the light, and read the name pressed into the base of the clasped hand seal, and the warmth that had been waking her for 3 nights moved through her chest all at once, and she understood that she was not carrying a document to the Alpha King. She was the document. She set the case back across her knees, carefully. She rested both hands on the lid. She did not run. She had nowhere to run to, had never, in 19 years under Erwick's guardianship, had anywhere to run to, and she had learned to treat that fact as information rather than grief. She breathed once, slowly, and she thought about what she knew. Her name was on the seal of a blood compact document. Blood compact law was old, older than most houses currently standing, older than Erwick's claim to Thornwall, older almost than the institution of the Alpha King itself. It required 2 parties. It required consent, given in the presence of witnesses, or in the absence of consent, the authority of a legal guardian standing in the ward's place. She had been Erwick's ward since she was 4 months old, when her mother had died, and her father, whoever he had been, had not appeared to claim her. Erwick had taken her in. He had used that fact to take, in 19 years, a great deal else. She thought, he has signed something with my name on it. With my name. And he has sent me to deliver it without telling me what it is. She thought, whatever it costs me, I am going to open this case. She did not open it on the road. She was not stupid. She needed to read it somewhere she could think, not on a stone wall with 8 of Erwick's men 20 yards away. She held the knowledge for 6 more days, tucked it flat and still inside her chest, carried it the way she carried everything she was not allowed to act on, quietly, without visible edges. Greyveain appeared on the 11th morning as a line of dark towers against a sky beginning finally to lighten. She had heard it described as the seat of the North, the court that never warms, the place where the Alpha King sat like something the land had grown rather than built. She had been told the king was cold and final, and rarely in court, because he was more often at the border, and she had thought, that suits me well. A cold court, and a distant king, and a delivery to make, and a road back to Thornwall that she now understood, not going to take. The gates were open when they arrived. A chamberlain in grey livery came out to meet them, and the captain dismounted and spoke to him, and the chamberlain looked past the captain to Thyren, and then looked again, and something shifted in his face that she could not read. Lord Erwick's ward, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. You'll be shown to the east quarters. He glanced at the case in her arms. You can keep that. She did not think about what that meant until she was alone. The east quarters were not servants' rooms. That was the first thing she noticed. The bed had a frame. The fire had been laid before she arrived. There was a window, narrow and arched, looking out over an inner courtyard, where torchlight caught the frost on the flagstones. She stood in the middle of the room with the case in her hands and looked at all of it and thought, this is a trap that looks like a gift. She set the case on the table and opened it. The document inside was folded in thirds and sealed again, this time with Erwick's personal wax. Dark blue, the sigil of the Thornwall house. But the outer fold bore a second seal she had not seen before, and this one she recognized from her transcription work, not as a house sigil, but as a crown notation, which meant the Alpha King's chamberlain had already read it, which meant the court already knew. She broke Erwick's seal. She unfolded the document. She read it. It took her 3 readings to understand the scope of it, and even after the third she sat still at the table for a long time, her hands flat on either side of the parchment, her breathing careful and even, the way it went when she was managing something large. The document was a treaty. 23 clauses, running across 4 pages of dense formal language, covering trade routes and border arrangements, and a mutual non-aggression compact between the Thornwall holdings and the Alpha King's northern territories. She had transcribed documents like this, had sat at Erwick's right hand for years and rendered his legal language into clean copy, had learned to read treaty structure the way other people read ordinary text. 23 clauses was substantial. 23 clauses meant the 2 parties had been negotiating for a long time. Clause 23 was 2 sentences. In consideration of the foregoing, and as final surety of good faith, the ward Thyren Cassivale, being subject to the full legal authority of her guardian Lord Erwick of Thornwall, is given in permanent bond to the Alpha King of Greyveain, to be received at his court on or before the first frost of the year. This clause is binding under the old compact law, and cannot be revoked by any authority except the Alpha King himself. She read it twice more. Permanent bond, old compact law, the Alpha King himself. She had heard of this. She had transcribed references to it. Old records, histories, the kind of legal precedents that appeared in treaties from 3 centuries ago and were cited now only as curiosity. The permanent bond under compact law was older than most living institutions. It had last been invoked, she remembered, 312 years ago, in the founding treaties of the Northern Territories, when the first Alpha King had taken his court at Greyveain. It was not a marriage contract. It was closer than a marriage contract. It meant that her life, her person, her legal existence was now bound to the Alpha King's court in a way that could not be undone without his explicit consent. Erwick had not told her. He had handed her the case and addressed his instructions to the middle distance and sent her down the road to deliver herself. She thought about this for a long time. She was 19. She had nothing, no money, no family, no holdings of her own, no legal standing apart from her status as Erwick's ward, which was now apparently concluded. The document in her hands was proof that she had been exchanged like a parcel. It was also, she noted, the only copy. Erwick had sent the original, which meant he either trusted her not to read it, or had not thought about what would happen if she did. He had not thought about it. He had never thought about her at all. She folded the document carefully and placed it back in the case and set the case on the shelf above the fire. She sat back down. She was still sitting there, very still, both hands resting flat on her thighs, when a knock came at the door. He was not supposed to come himself. She found this out later, from the archivist, from the old man Edric Fawn, who had been keeper of Greyveain's records for 40 years, and who had apparently made it his business to know everything that happened in the castle, and most things that didn't. The chamberlain had been sent to escort her to the receiving hall the next morning. There had been a protocol established. It had been followed in every previous iteration of this particular arrangement, in the 16 recorded instances of compact law bond deliveries in Greyveain's history. The Alpha King did not collect. He was standing in her doorway. He was tall, the kind of tall that announced itself before anything else did, that made the doorframe look like it had been built for a slightly smaller world. Amber gold hair worn longer, pushed behind one ear, loose across his forehead from a day that had apparently given him no time to deal with it. Eyes that were amber gold in the torchlight, unsettling in the way of something too direct to look at for long. He was not in armour. He wore the kind of clothes a man wears when he has come from a council chamber in too much of a hurry to change. Dark wool, good cut, a clasp at the collar she recognized as the Greyveain housemark. His build was the kind that made armour look like it had been designed for a body rather than the other way around, and she registered all of this in the 2 seconds before she stood up. And then she stood up. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her. Then he looked at the case on the shelf above the fire. "You opened it," he said. His voice was quiet and exact, the kind of voice that chose words the way someone picks up a tool, uses it, sets it down. He did not make it a question, because he already knew the answer. "Yes," she said. "Erwick told you it was a standard courier delivery." "He didn't tell me anything." She kept her chin level. She had learned to do that young, and she could not entirely abandon it now, even when some part of her would have preferred to let it drop. "He said don't open it. He said deliver it to the chamberlain and sign the receipt." Something changed in his face. Not softened. That was the wrong word. Became more specific. He looked at the case again, and then back at her. "How long ago did you read it?" "This afternoon." He was quiet for a moment in a way that had texture to it, that was clearly not absence of thought, but the controlled management of it. "I am Cadrith," he said, "King of Greyveain." "I know," she said. "The chamberlain addressed you at the gate. He didn't use my name." "I know who you are." A pause. "My lord." He looked at her for another moment. She held the eye contact 1 beat longer than she normally would have, some reflex of the situation, of being named in a document as a parcel, of standing in a room that was not hers in a castle she had not chosen, of having nowhere to go. His eyes shifted from amber toward something else in the colder light near the window. She was not afraid. She was angry, quietly, in the specific and tightly managed way she had been angry for most of her life, and she thought he could probably tell. "I didn't know the clause was in the treaty," he said. She looked at him steadily. "My lord, I mean that. My chamberlain placed it in the final draft." A pause, brief, deliberate. "On Erwick's written instruction, apparently. I have been looking into it since you arrived." She thought about this. "Clause 23 is binding regardless of how it was introduced." "Yes. Under compact law, I have no recourse that doesn't require your consent." "Yes. You could revoke it." He looked at her for a long time without saying anything. The fire was warm at her back. The case sat on the shelf between them, its clasped hand seal facing outward. "I could," he said. He did not revoke it that night. He also did not invoke it. He told her, in a conversation that lasted longer than she expected and covered more ground than she had prepared for, that she would be given time, that no clause in that document compelled her to anything she did not consent to, that the compact law was old, and he did not hold it the way his forebears had. He told her she could stay in the East Quarters for as long as she needed. He told her she could have access to the archive and the library wing if she wanted them. He did not say why. She did not ask. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. She would find out later, through Edric Fawn, who told her things in the dry and unhurried way of someone who had long since stopped caring about hierarchy, that the Alpha King had not voluntarily entered the east wing of Greyveain Castle in 4 years, that he conducted his council chambers and his audiences and his daily administration from the central hall and the north tower, that the east wing was the oldest part of the structure and served mostly as record storage and the occasional overflow for diplomatic guests. "Why does he come here?" she asked Edric the first time he came to introduce himself, appearing at her door on the 3rd morning with a candle and a roll of historical documents and the expression of a man who had been waiting to make this particular introduction. Edric looked at her over the top of the candle. He was small and very old, and had the specific calm of someone who had outlasted several things that should have outlasted him. "Because he doesn't know why," he said. "That's generally how it starts." She was not sure what to do with this information. She put it away and kept it. It started with small things, the way these things always started. She found a calculation error in a border assessment document that had been left in the East Archive, an error that, if left uncorrected, would have misallocated grain stores for 3 northern settlements through the winter. She corrected it in the margins, precise and unsigned, and left it on the stack. She did not sign it because she had not been asked to do it, and she did not want to be noticed, and she had spent 19 years being careful about not being noticed in ways that created obligations. He found the correction 3 days later. She was in the archive reading. She had, in the absence of anything else to do, been working through the historical compact law records, some impulse of self-preservation dressed up as research, when his shadow fell across the table. He had the document in his hand. "This is your work," he said. She looked up. "Yes. You found it before my assessors did. The multiplication error is on page 4. It propagates through the remaining calculations." She paused. "My lord." He set the document on the table. He did not sit. He stood at the edge of the table, looking at the correction, and she watched him make some decision she could not read the outcome of. "I was told you transcribed documents for Erwick," he said. "For 12 years. He didn't compensate you for that. He gave me room and board." A pause. "And my name on a blood compact clause, it seems." He looked up at that. Something moved through his expression, brief and specific, the kind of expression that comes from a man managing something he has not yet named. He stood with the document in his hands and said nothing for a moment. "Erwick has been summoned to answer for the clause," he said. "I know. Edric told me." "Edric tells you a great deal. He tells me things I could find out anyway by looking. I think he's saving me the time." She met his eyes. "I prefer to know what's happening. I spent a long time not knowing things it would have helped me to know." He set the document down. He was quiet for a moment in that particular way he had, controlled and full, like a room before a storm. "I read your correction 4 times, he said. "The first time I thought I'd miscounted. The second time I checked against the original survey. The third time I took it to my steward." A pause. "He said he couldn't have found it faster." She said nothing. She was not sure what to say. "I missed the council summary this morning," he said, which was not what she'd expected. "I know. I heard the bells." She hesitated. "I hope it wasn't because of—" "It wasn't." He picked up the document, set it back down. "I was in the East Wing." The fire was low. The archive was very quiet. She looked at the document and then at him and thought about the calculation error and the correction she had not signed and the 4 times he had read it. And something settled in her chest. Not comfort, not safety, but the very beginning of something that might eventually become one of those things. She did not say that. She said, "The next assessment runs north to the Meldron border. If the error repeated from the same source document, the allocation there will be off as well." He looked at her for a long moment. "Would you be willing to look at it?" "Yes," she said, "if you'd like me to." He was quiet again. Then, "I would." She looked at the document, then the one after it, then the stack of 6 assessment papers that had been prepared for the winter allocation, all of which, it turned out, had been drawn from the same original survey with the same propagating error. She worked at the archive table for 2 days and left a set of corrected calculations and a 3-page summary of her findings and her methodology. She did not sign any of it. He found her in the East Corridor the morning after she'd finished. "You didn't sign them," he said. "I wasn't asked to. I'm asking you now." She looked at him. He was standing in the corridor with the morning light coming through the slit windows in grey-blue shafts, and he looked. She had not seen this before, had not had the angle for it before. Tired. Not the surface tiredness of a bad night, but something deeper, structural. The tiredness of someone who had been managing everything for a very long time, and had not told anyone what it cost. He was holding the stack of corrected assessments, and his jaw was set in the way she had come to recognize as his version of control. She thought, he has been doing this alone for a long time. She kept the thought to herself. She took the corrected assessments from him and signed them in the careful hand she'd developed in 12 years of transcription work, and gave them back. He looked at her signature for a moment. "Thyren," he said, reading it. "Yes." He said nothing else. He turned and went back toward the North Tower, and she watched him go, and she held the thought carefully where it was, untouched, because touching it would mean she had started to let herself want something, and she had not yet decided whether that was allowed. The warmth had been waking her since the 3rd day on the road. She had called it cold. She had called it the fire dying. She had called it the unfamiliarity of the East Quarters, the strangeness of sleeping in a room that had a proper window. She had run through all of these explanations in the 5 weeks she had been at Greyveain, and she had reached the end of them, and she was left with the fact that every morning she woke with warmth, moving up her arm from where her hand rested on the shelf near the iron case, and every time she came within a certain proximity of Cadrith, King of Greyveain, the warmth expanded into something she had no good name for. Edric found her at the archive table on a Thursday morning, with the compact law histories open in front of her, and the specific expression, she gathered from his face, of someone who had been doing research they should have asked someone else to help with. "The suppression," he said without preamble. He set his candle down and pulled out the chair across from her, and sat in it, which she had noticed was how he signaled that what he had to say was going to take time. "You found the reference. There's a compound, she said. In the histories, applied to both parties in a compact law bond at the time of signing, which would have been when I was 4 months old, when Erwick signed as my guardian. It suppresses the bond's physical recognition until proximity is sustained for more than... She stopped. Did you know? I suspected, Edric said. When the king began appearing in the East Wing. How long does it take to fail? In the histories, sustained daily proximity for 3 to 4 weeks. He looked at her over the candle. You have been here 5. She was quiet for a moment. The warmth, she said. Yes. It's not... I haven't consented to anything. The bond's recognition is a physical process, not a choice, Edric said. Yes, that's correct. He paused. But what you do with the recognition is... She looked at the document in front of her. The compact law bond was 312 years old. The law was, at least, as old as the first Alpha King's founding treaties. It had been used rarely, and was now considered obsolete by most legal scholars. Erwick had known it wasn't obsolete. Erwick had known it would bind her without any act of will on her part, had counted on the suppression failing before she understood what was happening, had sent her to Greyveain without telling her any of it. She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, I need to speak to the king. She found him in the North Tower, after asking the captain of the guard, who looked surprised to be asked, and gave her directions anyway, because she had been at Greyveain long enough that people had stopped treating her as a temporary detail. The tower stairs were stone, narrow, cold in the specific way of spaces that were exposed to the sky on one side. She climbed them with the iron case under her arm, and the document, the original, her copy, her 3 pages of compact law research, in her other hand. He was at the window when she came in. A broad table covered in maps, a fire in the back wall, the kind of room that was clearly about use and nothing else. He turned when he heard her on the stairs, and his expression moved through something she could not entirely follow before settling. I know about the suppression compound, she said. He was still. He was very good at being still in the way that some men were good at being loud. You've been to the archive, he said. I have been in the archive since I arrived. That's where you put me. She set the case on the table. She kept the documents in her hand. You knew. Before I did. He said nothing. When did you know? 8 days after you arrived, he said. The warmth. Yes. A pause. I had the histories read to me when I was 12, he said, when my father was preparing the treaty. I didn't know Erwick had requested the clause. I told you that. But I knew what the compact law bond was, and when I started... He stopped. Started again, more precisely. When I found myself in the East Wing at hours I had no accounting for, I went back to the histories. And you didn't tell me? No. You let me find it myself. Yes. He turned from the window. He was wearing the same dark wool from the council chamber, the Greyveain clasp at the collar, and he looked at her across the map table with the specific directness he had that she still was not entirely used to. I thought you had been given no choices about any of it. I thought the least I could do was let you reach this one yourself. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the corrected assessments and the calculations in the margins, and the morning he had come to the East Wing and been missed at council. She thought about the roster change she hadn't known about until one of the guard had mentioned it in passing, that her return to quarters time had been moved to before dark, on the king's instruction, described as an administrative correction. She had not asked him about that. She was asking him now. The roster, she said. My evening times. Something shifted in his face. Brief and specific, the high colour at his cheekbones that appeared when something cost him. I didn't like the idea of you walking back alone, he said. That was 6 weeks ago. 7, he said. I'm aware of that. The fire was warm. The map spread across the table between them. He stood on one side, and she stood on the other, and the iron case sat between them with its clasped hand seal, and the warmth was moving up her arm and settling in her sternum, and she had been carrying it for 7 weeks, and she was tired of carrying things alone. "The bond can be revoked," she said. "Still, at your discretion." "Yes. I'm not asking you to revoke it." He looked at her. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking you to let me—" She stopped, found the right words. "I'm asking you to let this be a choice, not a compact, not a clause, not a legal instrument my guardian used to dispose of me." She held his eyes. "I am asking you to let me decide." He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that was not empty. "The bond is already present," he said carefully, "regardless of what either of us— I know what the bond is. I've read the histories. It doesn't—" She stopped. "It doesn't make this a choice for me. It makes it easier. It doesn't make it the same thing." He looked at her. She looked back. "Stay," he said. "Not because the compact requires it, not because Erwick sent you, because I am choosing you, and I am asking you to choose back." She held her chin level. She could feel the warmth all the way to her shoulder now, steady and certain, the way she imagined the bond felt when it was not suppressed and not fighting anything. She thought about Thornwall and the middle distance above her left shoulder, and the 9 years of contracts transcribed without acknowledgement. She thought about the correction in the margins and the 4 times he had read it. "Yes," she said. Lord Erwick arrived at Greyveain 12 days later, summoned formally by the King's Chamberlain on 3 counts: breach of wardship trust, fraudulent concealment of a compact law clause from the subject of that clause, and introduction of terms into a royal treaty without the King's knowledge or approval. He came with 4 men, and the expression of someone who had expected this to be manageable. He found Thyren in the receiving hall, standing to the right of the throne dais. Not on the dais, because she had specifically declined the offered position until the legal proceedings concluded, because she was not going to stand on a dais above the council while she was still technically a clause in a document. She stood beside the archivist's table, the iron case open in front of her, the treaty laid out and annotated in her careful hand, every clause cross-referenced with the compact law precedents she had spent 6 weeks compiling. Erwick looked at her, then at the documents, then at the king. "My Lord Erwick," Cadrith said from the throne, in the quiet and exact voice that made people lean in to catch it, "you have been invited to explain the introduction of Clause 23 into the Thornwall Treaty without the knowledge of this court or its subject." "The clause is standard compact law language," Erwick said. He had not looked at Thyren again. "Well-established precedent. The girl has no grounds." "The girl," Thyren said, "has the only original copy of the document, fully annotated, cross-referenced against every applicable compact law precedent from the last 312 years, and signed." She looked at him steadily across the room. "Including the precedent that requires explicit disclosure to the subject of a compact law bond at the time of signing, or at the latest, before the bond is delivered, which you did not do." A silence in the hall, the kind that accumulated. "That precedent," Erwick said, "is not—" "Page 47 of the Greyveain Archive's 3rd Historical Register," Edric said, from his chair at the edge of the room, without looking up from his own documents. "Cited in the 1141 Compact Review. Cited again in the 1203 Boundary Agreement. Consistently upheld. I can read it aloud if it would assist the council." The council, it emerged, did not need it read aloud. The proceedings lasted 2 hours. Erwick argued, and then negotiated, and then, when it became clear that neither of those was going to succeed, went silent in the specific way of someone deciding what they could afford to lose. The council ruled on all 3 counts. His guardianship authority over Thyren was formally dissolved. It had technically dissolved when she was delivered to Greyveain, but the ruling made it explicit and entered it into the record. The treaty's clause 23 was reviewed under the compact law precedent Thyren had cited. For it to remain binding, the subject's informed consent was required within 90 days of delivery. The subject had 30 days to formally declare. She had already decided, but she waited until the council had filed out, and the hall was mostly empty, until it was Cadrith and Edric and the open treaty on the table, and the fire burning low in the great hearth. And then she signed the declaration in the careful hand she'd had for 12 years and set down the pen. Erwick left Greyveain the following morning without speaking to her again. She did not watch him go. Spring came to Greyveain the way spring came to northern castles, reluctantly and without committing to anything, and leaving frost on the inner courtyard flagstones well into the 4th month. The light changed before the temperature did, a different quality to the grey, something with more behind it, the suggestion of warmth the land was not yet delivering. She had a room now, not the east quarters, those were back to being diplomatic overflow, but a room on the 2nd floor of the north tower that looked out over the keep wall to the forest beyond. She had a table and a chair and 3 shelves. The iron case sat on the top shelf, open, the clasped hand seal visible on the lid, the treaty inside undisturbed. She did not need to read it anymore. She knew every clause. Her work had expanded without anyone formally deciding that it should. She had begun correcting documents and ended up, over the course of the winter, reviewing and annotating the entire set of northern border assessments, reorganizing the East Archive's compact law holdings by precedent date rather than acquisition order, and writing a 6-page analysis of the suppression compound and its historical uses that Edric had placed in the archive's primary collection and described, without emphasis, as thorough. She still did not have a title. She had a chair at the council table when the border assessments were discussed. She had the captain of the guard bringing her documents to check before they went to the king. She had Cadrith appearing at her door in the mornings with the specific expression of a man who had decided to stop pretending he didn't know why he was there. The bond was not suppressed anymore. It had not been suppressed for months. She was aware of it the way she was aware of the cold when she stepped into the courtyard. A physical fact, consistent and present, requiring no particular attention. What she was aware of more specifically was him, the way he stood in doorways when he was thinking, the specific quality of his silence in a room, the thing he did with documents when he was about to say something he had been deciding whether to say. One morning in the 4th month, early, with the frost still on the courtyard and the light still deciding what it was going to do, he came to the North Tower room and stood in the doorway, and she did not look up from the document she was annotating, because she had learned that sometimes he needed to arrive somewhere before he knew what he'd come to say. Erwick's holding has been assigned to the Meldrin District Administration, he said. I know. Edric told me. There's nothing to go back to. There was never anything to go back to. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him in the doorway. The warmth, the bond, the specific weight of his presence in a space that she had started thinking of as hers, which was a thing she was still getting used to. I had a conversation with the eldest council member yesterday, he said. She looked up then. He was leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed, and the early light catching his hair, and the expression of a man delivering a field report. He had begun, over the winter, to tell her things, the details of his days, the state of the northern roads, the ongoing frustration of a specific council member who opposed every infrastructure proposal on principle. She had come to understand that this was his version of intimacy, offering information that cost him something, the private architecture of his daily life, laid out like a border map, trusted to her hands. What did he say? She asked. That I should formalize your position. A pause. He said it was an administrative irregularity to have someone reviewing and correcting council documents without a formal role. He's right, she said. It is. I told him I was working on it. His eyes had the quality they got when he was managing something he had already decided. I'd like to do it properly. The role would have a formal designation and a seat at the council table and access to all active treaty documents. He paused. And a title that means what it actually means, under the compact law that's already been invoked, rather than something designed to make the council more comfortable. She set the pen down. She looked at him in the doorway. That would make them uncomfortable, she said. Yes, he said. I find I don't mind. The morning light was coming through the slit window and catching the frost on the courtyard below, and the iron case sat open on the shelf with the treaty inside, and the warmth was settled in her chest now, like something that had been there a long time and had simply decided to stop being a question. She had not let herself want things for a very long time. She had been too careful and too small in too many rooms, and she had spent 19 years learning to need nothing, and she was still learning how to stop. But she looked at him in the doorway, and she thought about the calculation error and the 7 weeks and the roster change he had called an administrative correction, and she thought, this is what it looks like when someone decides to see you. This is what it looks like when they do not look away. All right, she said. He crossed the room. He stopped close enough that the warmth and the cold of the morning were both present, the bond and the window light and the frost below, and he looked at her the way he always did, the way she was beginning to understand. He had been looking at her since well before he understood why. He put his hand against her face, careful, like a man who has thought about how to do something correctly and decided that slowly was the only answer. And she leaned into it, and for a moment there was only that. The cold of the room, and the warmth of his hand, and the sound of the castle beginning its mourning around them. He kissed her once. It was not small exactly. It was specific, the way a decision feels when it has been made cleanly, after everything. She kept her chin level. Old habit. She could feel herself smiling anyway, which was, she thought, a fair accounting of the last several months, all her composure intact, and all her defences doing absolutely nothing about him. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt in the morning light. The courtyard would be wet by midday. The northern roads would need reassessing before the spring caravan routes opened, and there were 6 documents on the table waiting for her, and the treaty in the case on the shelf had been decided and signed and filed, and was no longer the most important document in the room. The council meeting is at the 2nd bell, she said. I know, he said. You should eat first. You didn't eat yesterday morning. He looked at her with the expression he got when she said things he hadn't expected, which was, she had found, one of her favourite expressions on him. How do you know that? The cook's morning log. I was reviewing the East Wing supply records. She picked up the pen. You skip meals when the council runs past midnight. I've been tracking it. You've been... He stopped. Why? She looked up at him. Because I'd like you to eat. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the voice that made people lean in to catch it, You've been here 5 months. 6, she said. I'm aware of that. He was still looking at her. She could see the thing moving through his expression, the thing he never performed, the thing that came out in rosters and corrected assessments, and in the way he stood in doorways at inconvenient hours. And she held his gaze until he finally exhaled, quiet and deliberate, like a man setting something heavy down. Come to the council meeting, he said, with a title. Yes, she said. The courtyard below was clearing. The treaty was filed. The case sat open on the shelf, not closed, not sealed, not something to be carried. Just a document in a room, on a morning that was hers, evidence of a long way come. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If you found out you had been written into someone's future as a legal clause before you had any say in it, would you have had the courage to claim it anyway on your own terms? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.